Hello to everyone joining. We'll be getting started in 1 to 2 minutes. Let everyone get in. All right, I think we'll start for the introduction component, and I know those are still coming in, so welcome to our Creating a Competitive Graduate Scholarship Application webinar. So today we will be talking about things like forming a competitive research proposal, different sections of the application you may be coming across, such as the referee section, publications and contributions, special circumstances, how the institutional selection committee review kind of rolls out, as well as available resources for you during this time. And at the end, we will have a kind of a panelist question section as well as a Q&A portion. So my name is Ashley Ryan, and I am one of the graduate and postdoctoral programming specialists at Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs. I will want to mention to you that this session today is being recorded, and it will be made available over the next few days on our website and the GSPA YouTube channel, and I'll send those links to you momentarily. So in terms of if you would like to use the closed captioning function in Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you should see an option that says Show Captions to enable that for your Zoom account. And we also, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Q&A portion so that you can send questions in throughout the event, and we will be looking through those near the end of the Q&A portion. One thing I want to mention about today is really focused on advice and tips in creating that strong application, not so much focused on the individual eligibility portion. So with that particular area, I highly recommend checking out the GSPA website to see all about kind of eligibility related items. I'll be sharing links for that as well. And so I will share those maybe now along with some other links. If we are unable to get to your question today, I would highly recommend reaching out to your program graduate coordinator as well. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. So before we move on, I'd like to share a territorial acknowledgement. The University of Waterloo acknowledges that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is coordinated within the Office of Indigenous Relations. I highly recommend checking out the information and resources and events that the Office of Indigenous Relations offers for students, staff, and faculty. And there's a link to their website that I've shared in the chat as well, or it looks like I did not share it, but I will share it right now. There we go. And with that, we'll turn over to the next slide, please, where we will be introducing our awesome panelists for today. So joining us today, we have Dr. Clarence Woodsma and Dr. Justin Wan from the Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs. They are both our interim co-associate vice presidents. We also have Dr. Nadine Flad joining us from the Marani Communication Center, who is the manager of graduate and postdoctoral programs, and Dr. Philip Bigelow from the Faculty of Health, who is the associate dean there. And with that, I will hand things over to Clarence.
All right, thank you very much, Ashley, and welcome everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and this shows your commitment and interest in pursuing a potential scholarship application with the Tri-Council. And I just wanted to offer a comment sort of from my perspective as a career academic, if you will. So I was fortunate enough to have a Shirk Doctoral Award as a student. So I've been an applicant, I've been where you are, but more importantly, I've also been someone that has adjudicated grad admission files, and in my time as chair of a program, I've chaired dozens of hiring committees in academia. And certainly I can tell you that holding the Tri-Council Award says something about the applicant that is widely recognized in the national context. So it doesn't matter where you are across Canada, we all know and understand the importance of NSERC, SSHRC, and CIHR in terms of the research work we do in our careers. So beyond the monetary value of these scholarships, which of course you all appreciate, but I just wanted to sort of stress the fact that there's a real sort of tangential benefit to this, that it says something about you as a scholar. So we really applaud your initiative in pursuing this. So I want to begin today just with some general advice about one of the key aspects that you're evaluated on, and that sort of is the centerpiece, if you will, of your application. And that is the research proposal itself. So we're going to talk a little bit about some mechanics and structural things, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Nadine, who's going to walk you through sort of how to approach the important content piece. So the first sort of broad statement is that what we're looking for in the research proposal is a story, a narrative, a strong story that gets the reader interested in the research work that you're proposing, but also very importantly, talks about the impact of that potential research. We love our research, we get right into it. It's something that we focused on, and we're sort of singular in our focus on that piece of research. But you have to be able to step back and communicate about your research to a broader audience and to a more general academic audience. So it's still an academic audience, but you have to tell us that convincing story. So things like subheadings are a useful way to structure the presentation of it. And in terms of things like the space on that 2-page proposal, make sure that you are using that space effectively. Why would you only use 1 page, for example? Like, you know, is there something that that you're leaving out in terms of that? And by the same token, avoid going the opposite way, which, you know, you're not preparing a cheat sheet for an exam where you're going to use 6-point font and try and see exactly how many words you can fit in there. So you have to make sure that it's pleasant in terms of its structure and organization and for the reader. And we'll be reading many of these applications, by the way. So again, we don't want to see sort of big blocks of white space in there. The use of images, again, this is something where you have to be very judicious in terms of your choice. Quite often, an effective image can help illuminate the research that you're proposing and add value to that narrative. Rather than trying to explain this complicated thing, maybe an image would work. But make sure that it really fits in the narrative well and adds value, and that you don't, for example, try and squeeze it in somewhere. I've seen many examples where, yes, an image was chosen, but again, if it's not an effective in its presentation, then it actually detracts from the quality of your application. And when we're looking at so many applications and they're all of high quality, we often look for differentiators, things that we can take comparable applications and sort of differentiate between them. So you don't want it to be something like, you know, poor image choice that sort of detracts from the overall presentation of your proposal. Obviously, you need to be concise in terms of your language. And again, Nadine is going to get more in terms of the content aspect of it. And in your choice of things like your references that you're going to include, again, focus on the quality and you know, again, think of you're making an argument. What's going to lend more credibility to the arguments that you're presenting or the logic that you're presenting? So choose scientific journals or what's relevant for your particular disciplinary context that has that sort of strength or veritas in support of what you were presenting in your proposal. In terms of the use of language, acronyms and jargon, something that often academics are accused of, and within our own disciplinary lenses and areas, we tend to rely extensively on the jargon and terms that we think everybody knows and understands. And you really have to be careful in the language that you're using, because you are writing this for, again, a general academic audience. So if you're going to use an acronym, and sometimes it's helpful in terms of the narrative, you know, that 4 large word descriptor that you condense to an acronym, make sure you're very clear up front in terms of presenting it the first time, and then use it again in an effective manner. You might be in a discipline and I'm not going to pick on disciplines, so I'm just using them as an examples, but if you're in math or physics, for example, you may have terminology that is very specific to your discipline, and it might be a comfortable language for you in terms of your study and your research, but it's something that is very specific to your discipline, and an over-reliance on that, again, when a reviewer is looking at this application alongside other applications, it makes it challenging for them to engage with the material and truly understand what's going on because of the density of the language that you're presenting. So be very careful in terms of the use of acronyms and jargon. The tone that you take should be purposeful as well. Not I would like to, because I would like to, well, it kind of invites uncertainty in the sense that, well, you'd like to, but whether you will or not yet remains to be seen, as opposed to using a stronger language like I will. This is what I will do in terms of my research. So it's really important to use that kind of strong, purposeful language in your proposal. Checking spelling and grammar, it's an obvious one. You've heard it every time that you've written something, in papers that you've written for courses, for example. We have that emphasis, but you'd be surprised at the number of times that, again, we see very thoughtful proposals that have a number of basic spelling and grammatical errors, which again is sort of a lack of attention to that detail. And don't just rely on spell checker or some other tool to check your writing. It has to be read and read thoroughly to try and pick out some of these errors. You don't want to have those errors because it becomes a point of differentiation again when we're comparing many and multiples. So moving on now to consider the proposal itself, that narrative has to demonstrate a couple of key things. First of all, why is it important? Why is your work relevant? And in terms of your work, for example, you may be doing foundational scientific work or theoretical work, where if you're trying to convey the importance of the work, the potential impact of that work to broader societal issues or planetary issues, it helps to draw the reader in. Then you can sort of take them further into the details of your particular research objectives and the potential impact of your work. So you really do need to establish right from the onset why your potential work is important and it's relevant. Right? So that's something that is key to start with in terms of your proposal. Start with the big picture and then bring it down into the details. In terms of you as a scholar, you're describing, your sort of academic history and your track record of work and publications and other kinds of research activity. What we're trying to assess when we review your proposal and your file sort of writ large is, do you have the capacity to do the work? Is it realistic in terms of what you're proposing? There's a couple of different dimensions to that. In your methodology, for example, if you indicate that you plan to interview, 250 people, we're going to look at that and say, well, that's not very realistic, right? It's not demonstrating that you've thought and understand, for example, that particular methodological approach and the potential for it to actually succeed. So do you have the capacity, the background to carry out that work? Is it realistic? And this also extends to thinking about your supervisor and your supervisory committee, whether it's master's or doctoral, and to what extent they align with the work that you are proposing in your Tri-Council application. So if your supervisor is a world expert in topic X and your research sits squarely in topic X, then that's obviously something that you want to highlight and is going to strengthen the overall sort of acceptance of your proposal. Like, it makes sense. It's realistic in terms of what you're proposing. So this is really something to convey through your application as well. In terms of equity, diversity, inclusion considerations in your research proposal, you may be doing work with equity deserving groups, whether it's Black, Indigenous, persons of color, women, etc. So you have to be very purposeful, in particular if you're doing research with those constituents, And we see that often reflected, for example, in your research design, the methods that you've chosen, the literature that you're referring to. So be purposeful in terms of how you address the issues of the community that you're potentially working with in terms of your research, if it's relevant. So there are guidelines, for example, within the Tri-Council on approaching work with the EDI community. So this is obviously something you should consult in preparation and as you're preparing your proposal. In terms of getting feedback, I began by saying that it's critical that you be able to convey a story about the research that you're doing, what it's about, the impact that it potentially has. And you want to be able to present it to a general academic audience. So it's really, I think, helpful for you as you're working on your proposal to get that kind of feedback. Yes, from your supervisor, perhaps from peers and colleagues within your unit, but it's really helpful if you know somebody within the graduate student community, for example, from another disciplinary context, where you can say, hey, would you mind taking a read for my 2-page research proposal? I know this isn't your discipline at all, but it would just help to give you that different perspective on a general academic reading your proposal. So that's something that I think we all benefit from. And in terms of when you undertake that, when you're writing the proposal, and often we get caught with deadlines and we tend to be under pressure to write this, and we want to just sort of finish it off and hand it off and get feedback. But I encourage you to sort of get it about 95% of the way complete. Take a break from it, leave it alone, wait 24 hours, and then send it off for feedback. And part of the reason why I'm saying just, don't finish the whole thing, do it at about 95%. When we're writing, we often get sort of a tunnel sort of mindset as we're thinking in our minds, and we're producing that as we're writing the narrative out sort of on the page in front of us. And you can look at the words and you'll be thinking in your mind, and you've kind of convinced yourself that you've made the appropriate argument, or perhaps you've made that connection in logic, right? So, yeah, you're writing away. Yes, I've covered that off. But sometimes the words that we actually put on the page are not exactly in alignment with what was in our head, so to speak. So having somebody else read it at the stage is really helpful, because they may be able to point out those gaps in logic, and you'll get that feedback from them that ultimately would be super valuable in terms of, again, creating that sort of complete narrative, that complete story, from sort of beginning objectives through methods to potential impacts and outcomes, and sort of tying it all together. And the other key piece of advice, and it's a resource that it's not only students, academics across campus, postdocs, faculty members, etc., all take advantage of the Writing and Communication Center resources. These are academics that specialize in the importance of communication, and we're going to hear from one of them currently, who's going to take us through the steps in creating that proposal. So I'm going to pause my bit here and then turn it over to my colleague Nadine to carry on.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to start sharing. All right. So my name is Nadine. My pronouns are she, her. I teach at the Writing and Communication Center, and the role of the Writing Communication Center within this application competitive scholarship world is really to support you with the research proposal in particular. So over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to share some of the things we often talk about with applicants in individual consultations, individual appointments with writing and communication advisors, to give you some strategies to achieve all of those things Dr. Woodsma just talked about in terms of, avoiding jargon, being aware of making your work accessible to an interdisciplinary or general academic audience, and being able to articulate the impact of the work that you plan to conduct as part of your application. So here we go. One of the first things we encourage students to think about for any communication task is to sit and think about, identify the rhetorical situation. So to write a strong proposal, you need to understand who you are writing it for and why. And so the research proposal is a genre of its own with its own conventions. And we need to consider the audience who is reading the proposal, the purpose, what you need to accomplish with it beyond getting the money, and the context. So what is the situation your readers are going to be in when they encounter your proposal? And so the answers to these questions inform the decisions about structure and style and the choices that you make within the proposal. So we're going to dive into these in a little bit more detail before we talk about some actual structural and stylistic choices you might want to make. So the audience, in this case, is going to be a somewhat multidisciplinary panel of both experts and non-experts. So, this will vary depending on which scholarship you are applying for. My PhD was in Canadian literature. When I was applying, I might have had somebody who studies medieval literature, somebody who studies history reading my proposal. So I can't take for granted that they are familiar with the same theories, body of work, assumptions that people who study Canadian literature, my immediate subfield, might be. So they'll be part of a discourse community, and they'll share an understanding of how humanities research or STEM research or health research is designed and evaluated and communicated. But they may not be the precise, narrow discourse community that you're used to writing to in journal articles, in course assignments, talking to lab mates, etc. In terms of the purpose, this is what your proposal needs to include to demonstrate that your project is worth pursuing and that you are the person to do it. So Dr. Woodsma talked about this a little bit already. This is part of that feasibility. Is this, a project that can actually be accomplished? And do you have the skills to accomplish it? So you want to make sure that you are letting people know within your proposal who you are. So, what is your previous experience? What is the project you're proposing? When and where it's situated? So in research, so, what are the other conversations happening in this field, but also in the world? You would be surprised how many people forget to tell us, for example, in a CIHR proposal, where geographically this research is situated. Are we dealing with Canada, North America, Kitchener-Waterloo, the entire world? You want to talk about why this research is significant and how you will actually do it. And so that's our purpose. When it comes to context, this is what's really important to keep in mind and what is really easy to forget as you become engrossed in your subject matter. And that is your proposal will be read very quickly. So the adjudicators will be reading many, many proposals over a short period of time, and they may not spend the time to find the novelty or value of your project. So it's your job as the writer, as the applicant, to make these things as clear to the reader as possible. So you want to make their job simple by ensuring that your proposal is engaging, easy to scan, because they're unlikely to take the time to reread a sentence. So you want to organize and make this as easy to read as possible and make sure that it flows. And so now we're going to dive into some strategies for actually accomplishing those things. So we'll start with structure, and then we'll move on to sort of sentence level stylistic choices. So proposals are a persuasive genre of writing. So you are trying to convince your committee, your adjudicators, that your work is meaningful, valuable, and feasible. And so they should answer the question of, so what? So in other words, why is this proposal significant? So in the image on the screen, the salesperson is telling the buyer all about the car's new and interesting features, but failing to explain why they matter. So why the buyer should care. So many research proposals, when students come in with early drafts of their proposals to the WCC, will do this as well. It is obvious to you because you are so engaged in your subfield why a new blind spot monitoring system is a good thing. But as someone who knows nothing about cars, I don't know why that is a good thing. Is it better than the systems that existed previously? Did no systems exist previously? Why do we need a blind spot monitoring system? You might think this is obvious, but you need to spell these things out explicitly for your readers. And one way to do that is to use something called the CARS model. So CARS, which stands for Creating a Research Space, is a structure you can use to sell your project and show its significance. This template or pattern was identified by Swales and Feek, who are writing studies researchers, and they identified this pattern after looking at lots of academic articles, especially their introductions. So once you are familiar with this strategy, you're going to see it everywhere. It's the one thing I didn't learn in grad school that I wish I had known at the very beginning, because it would have made my life so much easier. So CARS has 3 moves. There are these 3 steps in order that happen. And depending on the length of your proposal, the structure of your proposal, you might do this multiple times throughout the proposal. You might write an intro paragraph that has all 3 of these moves, and then you might spend full paragraphs on each of these moves throughout the rest of the body of the proposal. So first, you need to establish the context. What is happening in the world or in your field? Then you need to describe what is missing from the world or from the world of research. And then finally, once you have identified that gap, you explain how the work you are going to do helps to remedy that. So we might say, overall, this is what the field of research is at the moment. Here's the state of the field. Here's what's missing. And then here's what my work is going to do to help fix that or mitigate that. Another way of thinking about this, if visual aids are better for you and more accessible to you, is to think about spheres. So we have here the large sphere saying this is the world of research. We have a smaller sphere saying here is the elements that are missing or flawed or have been ignored in the field. And then the even smaller sphere is the world of the research that you are going to take on. This is where especially early stage graduate students can get a little bit overwhelmed, because all of a sudden you walk into grad school, it's day 1, and we're asking you to put together this proposal. And maybe you even haven't had a chance to identify through a literature review what the state of the field is yet. Well, that's going to be step 1. But it's a lot of pressure to make new knowledge, to alter the fields on day 1. And so something to keep in mind is that these research contributions are often small. They are tiny moves forward that push the entire field further. So the key is describing and articulating the contribution that your work will make, but don't feel pressure to make a giant contribution in your work. That actually looks naive. That's going to actually make me think that maybe you don't have a grasp on the scale at which research takes place or the speed at which research takes place. So what does this look like in practice? So we have here an example. This is a move 1. This is the first move that establishes the context. So in this example, and this comes from a conference proposal, we have a couple of sentences that identify the state of the field generally. So there is growing acceptance that if states are unable or unwilling to prevent and react to mass atrocities within their borders, this responsibility to protect must fall to the international community. Academics working on this issue typically focus on the dilemmas involved in protecting civilians on the ground, highlighting the failures and less often the successes of international approaches. So this is what has been happening so far in this field. And so for this move 1, we use language like, this topic has been extensively studied. Interest in this topic has been growing. Recent studies have focused on X. This topic has become a major issue. So tell us about the conversation that's happening in the journal articles around you. For move 2, in this case, we have just one sentence. Less recognized, however. Notice that transition language that tells us we're moving into move 2. Less recognized, however, are the strategies and mechanisms that civilians themselves develop to survive and continue to fulfill various life projects. So people are talking about international aid agencies, but nobody's talking to the civilians themselves. We have the general context, what's missing from the conversation. In this case, what counts as a gap can vary widely, and it often varies widely according to discipline. So it might be that something is wrong, previous work has been inaccurate or flawed. It might be that something is missing because previous studies have not examined this particular aspect of a topic. Or it might be that there isn't a consensus, so something is unclear. So we haven't asked this question explicitly, or that there is a lot of conflicting research, and maybe your goal in move 3 is to identify a trend or help come to a consensus by retrying some of these experiments, for example, that have come to differing results, or design a new experiment that is going to create a reliable, reproducible result. So this can highlight missing perspectives, problems that have been solved in another discipline but haven't been applied to your discipline and haven't been tried. And if you're doing interdisciplinary work, this is a good place. This move 2 is a great place to start connecting those disciplines. How are they talking to each other? How does that result in something being missing? And then the third move zooms into your research project. So you are going to share your plan to develop the missing puzzle piece that you have identified is missing by outlining the context in move 1 and the gap in move 2. So in our example, notice how much longer this section is. This is where the details happen. So here we have, in an attempt to address this gap, great, clear transition language that helps the reader follow the structure of this proposal. This paper examines the self-protection strategies that Syrian refugees use to escape the violence in their country and begin life anew on the margins of Jordanian society. Okay, so that one sentence says, I'm going to fill the gap of this missing piece that I have identified. The rest of the sentences explain the details of what filling that gap is going to look like as a project. Beginning with the lived experiences of the refugees themselves, it explores the various social and cultural resources and networks on which they have drawn, and highlights the frequent isolation of these activities from international aid efforts. This paper thus challenges the conventional view of civilian protection as a commodity to be delivered by actors external to the conflict. Instead, survival and protection are understood as living processes, as local actors strive to navigate insecurity, break cycles of conflict, and foster sustainable development in their surrounding environments. So we've given clues to the kinds of research questions that are being asked here, what the structure of the final document, the thesis, the journal article might look like, and even hinted at what we think some of the conclusions might be. I mean, we don't want to assume that we know what will happen when this study is conducted, but we want to give the sense that we understand what direction this might go in. Okay, so that is one strategy that is really useful for thinking through how to structure your proposal. You can structure the entire proposal this way with paragraphs with each move. You can develop an introductory paragraph that is sort of a summary of the whole project and uses all 3 of those moves in one paragraph. You don't always have to use them in order, but it is important that your proposal contains these components. And it is usually move 2, when I am working with students individually, that is missing. It is usually the here's what doesn't exist and why that is a problem that students take for granted because it's obvious to them, but they forget to put into their proposal. Once you have a draft of a proposal, you're going to want to take a look at some of the sentence level strategies you're using or decisions you're making. So Dr. Woodswood talked a little bit about tone. And so, yes, you want to be walking a line between confidence and arrogance. You don't want to be too tentative. So I would like to, too tentative. I will, strong. And so you want to position yourself as a peer, as a colleague to the people who are reading the proposal, right? Like you are already a researcher. So rather than saying, I am awesome and this is why you should give me money, we're going to use the grammatical choices of using first person, I, using active strong verbs, will, in order to describe the project and what it accomplishes. You know, this project explores, identifies, rather than this project focuses on. We want to be really clear and precise in our verb choices. That's how you demonstrate confidence through the writing itself. That's how you demonstrate that you are a researcher. In terms of the overall style, we want this to be formal and academic, but still accessible. And so one way to do that is to simplify sentence structures. So it can be really tempting to overcomplicate your language because we often equate formality with, you know, a higher level of thought, more complicated thoughts. But this can actually hurt your application, in part because it's harder to read and people aren't taking the time to reread sentences, and in part because you are being judged on your ability to communicate in your proposal. So communicate in a way that is understandable to your readers, and in part because you have limited space. And so the more concise you can be, the more ideas you can fit into your proposal. So instead of something like, there is a large body of experimental evidence that clearly shows that members of the genus Crotalus assemble simultaneously in cases of prolonged decreased temperature conditions in the later part of the year. I can barely get through that sentence without taking a breath. Something like, research shows that rattlesnakes gather when it gets cold in the fall. Gets the main idea across in far fewer words. You know, you want to take a look at your sentences and see how long they are. Can you actually say them out loud in a breath? We don't want to overwhelm readers with these long, complex sentences here. So another way to say this is that we value clarity over fancy language. So when it comes to jargon, we want to make sure that we are sneaking in the meaning of that jargon in a sentence afterwards in order to make sure that everyone who is reading has all of the information they need. Or if you can use a metaphor or a synonym in order to explain the concept, that's great. So here we have, at the outset, the aforementioned results facilitate fretfulness for practitioners. That's the kind of language I would use if I were doing an interpretation of an academic on television. But if I were trying to actually communicate my ideas, I would choose clear, concise language. First, these results cause concern for practitioners. So these is a great way to refer back to something you've already mentioned. You don't have to say the aforementioned results. You can just say these results if you've mentioned them in the previous sentence. Okay, so those are some of the conversations that we often have one-on-one with students who are putting together a proposal when they come to the Writing and Communication Center. And I want to take 3 minutes just to share a little bit about the resources that are available to you as you put together your proposal. So we have one-on-one appointments. You can schedule an appointment with a writing and communication advisor, full-time professional staff who do this day in, day out. And they can be a great first reader. They can be a great reader who is not in your field to get a sense of whether or not this is accessible. You don't have to wait until you are 95% done your proposal to come and talk to us. Save that for the people you are asking for a favor to read your proposal, colleagues, peers, etc. We're happy to talk to you at the very beginning stage. We're happy to talk to you as you are brainstorming or conducting a literature review and figuring out what you want to say. We're also happy to talk to you at the very end stage when you're polishing. But you can book an appointment with full-time staff or with peer tutors to talk about your proposal. We also have an online module on Learn. So Learn is the learning management software University of Waterloo uses, and you can self-register for our site on Learn called WCC Workshops. And once you have accessed that site, you can access a module called Tri-Agency Scholarships, Writing Your Research Proposal. And it goes through the material I just shared much more slowly and in much more detail. And there are videos where colleagues of mine, such as Emma, who is pictured on the screen right here, walk through their own proposals and the decisions they made. And we have annotated examples of successful proposals and all kinds of resources there. So you can access these on your own, work through the module at your own pace. Finally, we'll have WCC staff standing by at events to support you. So we host writing groups, writing cafes every week. And on September 25th and October 2nd, that writing cafe will be scholarship proposal themed. So we'll have staff standing by to give you feedback if you want to show up and talk to somebody about your proposal on those days. And we'll also be at Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs scholarship workshop event on September 25th in the evening. So you can talk to WCC staff there as well. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn things back over to Dr. Woodsma to talk about other elements of the application process.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nadine. And I love putting on events like this because it also gives me an opportunity to learn. So I really appreciate Nadine's presentation and that the model of thinking about, again, your narrative. We focus a lot thus far on the proposal itself, the research proposal, and obviously that's one of the key criteria. But in the remaining time, I'm going to go through some of the key other elements within your Tri-Council application, and then we're going to culminate at the end by hearing a little bit of a focused insider perspective from myself and colleagues that represent the other councils. So let's talk about referees. You've gone through this process already as a graduate student where you've had to seek referees to support your grad school applications. And again, it's something that students face sometimes, as a rather daunting challenge to connect with a professor and ask them to write a strong supportive letter. And these are absolutely critical to the success of your application. And you really need to think carefully about your selection of referees and which referee would help support your application and be able to sort of go along with the narrative that you've established, not only in terms of your research proposal, but in all those other key elements in terms of the criteria. So it's not just about the proposal, but it's your research ability and your potential as a researcher, and also the relevant experiences that you've had and that they can potentially speak to. Obviously, you want to choose somebody that knows your academic strengths well, right? This is a scholarship application in academia. So your supervisor is often an obvious choice, and they may know you and the work that you're doing very, very well. What about that other referee that you may choose? Perhaps it's somebody that you worked with in a completely separate project or environment, but they can also speak to your experiences. Perhaps it's as a role as a mentor, for example, in another context where you supported the work of another student. So there's something that they can add that connects with the criteria that your particular council is seeking in terms of the referees. Obviously, you want to request that referee early. If you're the night before saying, "Hey, I completely forgot, can you write me a letter?" Doesn't leave a lot of time for thoughtful reflection, and it is not sort of the best foot forward. So get that request in as early as you can. And again, as somebody that's read thousands of letters, I've written hundreds of reference letters, and I know that what we look for in terms of the qualities of letters, we can tell where there's a real connection and a real relationship between the referee and the applicant and in the crafting of those letters. And that doesn't mean you have to sort of been working with them for years and know them intimately well, but it's important to make that selection where somebody can speak to that connection. And if they can't, you need to give them the sort of materials that they can sort of create the reference letter around sort of what you provided. So it's sort of expected now when a student asks me about, can you act as a referee? I say, sure, send me what you're applying to, send me the criteria, send me what you're submitting in terms of the application package, send me your resume so that I can sort of use that information along with what I know of you already, whether it be through a single course or some other engagement, and be able to write an effective reference for you. It's really important. Also, it's totally within bounds to mention to them, say, look at, in particular, this criteria, I think the project that I did with you is a great example, and I'd appreciate it if you could speak to that one in particular. That's okay to sort of give them the suggestions on what criteria might work. And it's also perfectly in line to send them a reminder. They'll thank you for it. I know that, again, when students ask me for a reference, I ask them to remind me a week before the deadline, just to make sure that I don't lose track, with all the other work that I'm doing, that I would miss that opportunity. It would be absolutely crushing if I let a student down in that regard. So send them a reminder a week before. Now, you're not being annoying at all, at least from my perspective. And of course, it's great to thank them afterwards as well, right? Thank you so much for support moving forward. In terms of the publications, this is something that often causes consternation when students start talking to one another and thinking about their own experiences and what they've contributed to academically. And the levels of output and dissemination vary widely from discipline to discipline. You might be working in a very applied field. I'll take an example that I'm familiar with, for example, remote sensing, which is technical applied research using satellite sensors, for example. And publications, come out regularly and frequently on sort of various technical domains. And you might be a master's student that already has engaged with a publication, an academic journal as an undergrad, and maybe a couple as a master's students and a conference presentation. And you might be looking at a resume from a master's student that has 5 or 6 publications peer-reviewed on their CV already. Whereas someone that, for example, is working in English literature or another discipline where the outputs tend to be fewer and perhaps larger in context, like a monograph or a chapter. So again, how do we compare those different disciplinary norms in terms of the volume of publications? Please be rest assured that we certainly take those into consideration. In fact, there is a covenant or an agreement called the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment that all institutions have signed off on, that basically says when we evaluate scholarship, we are going to bear this disciplinary variation and norms in mind, right? So don't be worried if you don't have huge volumes of output. What is important in terms is, again, conveying the importance and impact of that work. Obviously, peer-reviewed is the sort of standard that indicates that your work has been vetted by peers and other academics, and it's the standard that we sort of look to in terms of the quality and impact of your dissemination work. But it's certainly not the only output that we examine. You need to be clear and differentiate between what is peer-reviewed and what is not. And you have to be careful with things like conferences. So make sure you do your homework and you're representing your CV appropriately. But there's other metrics that talk about the impact of your research work as well. You might, for example, contribute to a blog that deals with your particular substantive area. And perhaps that blog, which again talks about your research in some extent, has been viewed by thousands of people. That's also impactful. Not in an academic sort of peer-reviewed sense, but it is an impactful in terms of a disciplinary context or even a societal sense. So don't undervalue those kinds of dissemination efforts and research activity. The key is that you have to be the one that conveys that importance. Similarly, with your professional experiences, you might have done work, for example, in a research lab in the private sector, or perhaps worked in a hospital environment, and you're pursuing graduate work in health studies or in some field related to health studies. you can, again, create the story around how that activity links and supports with your aspirations in terms of research and your research proposals. What have you learned from that work environment, and how does it translate into supporting your ambition as a researcher and your pursuit of the scholarship? So this is something that certainly you can add in statements, the different sections within your council application. The name may vary across the tri-councils, but there is always a section that talks about special circumstances. So again, look to the particulars within your competition, but these special circumstances are particular events that are unique and impacted your academic productivity and help sort of explain a potential gap. One scenario, for example, you might be an undergraduate student that was clipping along at a high 80s average in year 1 and year 2. And when we look at your transcript, there's a drop in year 3 where your average is 60. And then year 4, it increases again into the high 80s. So what happened in year 3? There was perhaps a life-altering event that impacted your family and your abilities to maintain the focus on your studies, something that occurred that was unique to you and impactful. And the councils want you to be able to have the opportunity to explain that gap. And that's what the special circumstances sections are. It's not something to be treated sort of trivially in the sense of, oh, well, instead of my average of 93, I dropped down to 90. It's like, oh my goodness, what happened? It's like, I had one course and it was really hard. Like, that's not a special circumstance. And we're talking about something that is a significant variation from your record that warrants explanation. And that's perfectly something that that you could take advantage of. But read the requirements carefully and see, if indeed your circumstances warrant addressing there. So how does the selection process unfold here on campus? We have a selection committee that, again, is managed by the staff and GSPA in consultation with myself and Professor Wan, and the 6 associate deans from the various faculties on campus form the selection committee. And every application, and we get hundreds of applications, are read by at least 2 of us, one from within your faculty and one from outside. Again, a reminder of that importance of being able to present your research in a way that is understood by an academic not expert in your discipline. Okay. Those scores are compared and assessed, and let's the ones with the high scores are moving forward. You appreciate this is a competition in terms of the number of files that we can move forward. But I want you to appreciate that if we take a hypothetical where we have 100 applications, when we review them, let's say there's 20 that stand out right away, they're going to move forward out for award or for consideration by the committees at the various councils. And then there's also 20 that perhaps just don't make the grade in terms of the criteria and the standing, and they would be a no. And then we have these 60 in the middle, and quite often we'll bring in a third reader to help us make our decision around those 60 in the middle. Again, we go through those carefully. We are going to rank them, and some will move into the yes, and some will have a revision list as well in case that there are candidates that we have moved forward as a yes that may decline the award for whatever reason, and in which case we will move people from the revision list onto the yes list. Again, we're reading a lot of these in a short time frame, given the cycles that the agencies put before us. So it's really important that you present a research proposal that, again, is engaging, is clear, and convinces us that you have the capacity to do the work that you have proposed in your research proposal. So that's how the institutional selection committee runs. Now, just to close out today, each of us is going to offer some specific tips. So this is to the social scientists in the audience, just a couple comments specifically about applying to SSHRC and what I've seen with my engagement with SSHRC over the years. We talked before about the importance of writing for a general consideration. And one of the challenges within SSHRC, for example, that I would argue is that there really is a wide diversity of disciplines in SSHRC. And the way that they break down the various disciplines in the social sciences is they create these 5 different committees. So you need to think carefully about what discipline you're working in and what related disciplines are relevant for your research. And again, that's going to slot your application into one of those 5 committees, but there's a lot of diversity, right? So I'll just sort of, I'm reading this, so bear with me, but committee 3, for example, includes anthropology, archaeology, archival science, communications, criminology, demography, geography, library and information science, sociology, urban and regional studies, and environmental studies. So chances are whoever is going to be reading your proposal is not going to be an expert at all, and it's going to be from this sort of diverse landscape. So it really sort of stresses the point that you have to make your application accessible to that general academic audience. Test it outside your disposal. The other comment that I'll offer about what I've seen in SSHRC applications is the most common line as far as, again, you're writing this proposal, this is work that you're going to be doing in the future. You may be, just at the initial stages and you haven't quite really crystallized exactly what it's going to look like. And then I'll read something like, I propose a mixed methods approach. And it's like, everyone talks about mixed methods. It's the most common line. So what exactly do you mean by that? And how specifically is that methodology going to allow you to fill that gap, answer that question, right? So while the substantive topics may differ from discipline to discipline, there are a lot of sort of common methodologies across the social sciences. So make sure that your methods presentation is cohesive, that what you're going to actually do for the research is going to help you answer that question, right? So be really clear about the use of your methods. I've seen many proposals where I look at the methods section and it's like, this individual hasn't really thought carefully about how the method is going to provide the data, the information they need to actually answer that question. There's not alignment there. So this is something that, again, when it comes to the methods in the social sciences space, not to take for granted. I'm now going to mute myself and invite my colleague, Professor Wan, to talk about NSERC specific tips. Justin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Wan. I'm a faculty member in computer science. A few years ago, when I was the graduate director in CSK, so I read a lot of NSERC applications. And here I would like to share some of my experience and hope that it will help you make your application stronger. So the number one thing that NSERC applications compared to some other applications is that they're typically technical. In fact, sometimes can be very, very technical. In a lot of the disciplines within science and engineering, we use abstract symbols and notations and formulas and so on. Okay, and for people who are not in your field, these terminology can be overwhelming and sometimes can be intimidating. So we need to be mindful about this when you prepare for the application. Now, here I'm not saying that you should not use analytical terms in your application. You should, you do, okay? But in the meantime, think about your audience, okay? Whether you are able to explain to them what these are all about. Again, okay, go back to Karen's and Ladim's earlier discussion. You want to tell a story that is interesting to your audience. And in the end of the day, what matters is that whether they're able to understand your work. You want to impress them, right? You want to impress the committee members that you're doing good work and this proposal is a strong proposal, and they will be impressed only if they understand what you're doing. Okay, so it's very important that so how do you write your technical details in a way that is not overwhelming. Okay, you don't want the entire proposal. It's just technical terms after technical terms, but try to give a more general description of what you're doing here. So an easy thing to do that you could do is to show it to your friends and see if they can follow what you're doing. If they don't understand a word what you're talking about, okay, well, maybe it's a good time to review and revise. Next slide, please. Objectivity. Okay, so well, it sounds obvious. Okay, so and science and engineering research typically are objective work, but sometimes when we describe our work, okay, so we have to be careful. And in fact, very often we try to be quantitative result, right? So we compare my method with some other methods and demonstrate that, okay, I'm doing something good. And students often are overly excited about their own approach, and they usually say that this is the best method in the world, and sometimes they are over harsh on the other methods and say that, oh, the other methods world, they're terrible, and so okay. So this is not the best way. Okay, you try to stay objective in your discussion of the result and so on. Okay, so try to talk about the actual content. Say my method takes that much hours and the other method takes that many seconds. Okay, so that's how you are able to communicate the same message without necessarily putting all the subjective measure super fast, super slow, and so on. Okay. And keep in mind that your audience comprises of people who are actually in the field. So if you say my method is terrible, that's definitely not a good thing. But also there are people on the committee that they are outside your field, so they may not understand, okay, what exactly that you're trying to say. So be more descriptive about the content, okay, of your work. And the final slide, next, please. Is to communicate about your research contribution. In our in technical field, very often the publication is not always in journals, sometimes also in conferences, and somehow in science and engineering, a lot of conferences, they are down to some kind of synonym. Okay, so field symbols. Okay, so C graph for computer graphics and so on. Okay, so people outside the field may not necessarily understand these conferences. Okay, so when it comes to contribution, it's more useful to talk about the actual impact, the actual research work that you've done or you're going to do, rather than, okay, I'm going to publish in these journals and these conferences and all the number of publications and so on. Okay, as Karen mentioned, right, the number is not always the criteria. Okay, so we try to think of the significance of the research. So for example, it's more useful to talk about, okay, my method can be faster than the other method. My method can do more. We can overcome more issues than some other method. So be more concrete and direct about your contribution and the significance of your research in preparing your proposal. So that's what I wanted to say, a few tips about NSERC, and let's move on next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Phil Bigelow. I'm from the Faculty of Health, and I've reviewed a lot of these applications. I used to be the grad officer in the School of Public Health Sciences, and at that level, we did give detailed reviews of applications, and here's some just some tips. And I just want to kind of say that everything that's been said so far actually is really relevant, of course, to CIHR as well. But these are just some added things to maybe help out your application. And again, I would really encourage working with your supervisor to help with your have a look at your proposal. And this first point here is reviewing CIHR's strategic plan. And if your research fits one of their action items in their strategic or their priorities in the strategic plan, really try and highlight that. And if you look up that strategic plan of CIHR, there's lots of areas where your research is likely going to fit in anyway. So just try and think about that, because reviewers that have expertise from health know what CIHR is looking for. So that's really going to help out your application. As a graduate officer, even I remember having applications where they actually fit better with SSHRC as opposed to CIHR. So really you should be thinking of that, when you're working with your supervisor, which is the best. When you're in health, some of these do fit SSHRC, but they also can fit NSERC as well. But from my perspective in the School of Public Health Sciences, is sometimes there's some qualitative work where SSHRC may be a better spot for the application, but it depends on the outcomes of the study and stuff like that. So, but it's important to review that CIHR strategic plan and their priorities. And as mentioned throughout the session, actually, that slide kind of went away here, but there it is. But this issue of focus and the gaps, I just want to emphasize that Martini glass approach is great, because as reviewers, we don't have a lot of time. We want to know what the area of research is that we're talking about, what the problems are, but quickly get down to what you're going to do in your specific project. So make sure it's nice and clear. You know the field, you know the methods, you know where the gaps are, and you can come down to a very focused thing that your research is going to do. So clarity is so key. Now the next point is about clarity is important, but also if there's anything innovative about your project, has special impacts, and of course feasibility. Clarence mentioned a bunch of times about feasibility. Your proposal should highlight the fact that you can actually do this work that you're proposing. So those are important to make yours stand out. If you're amongst those applications that, where reviewers are looking for that extra little bit, make sure you consider these things to bring your application to the top. But especially important is how your findings from your study is going to influence and inform areas that are really relevant to CIHR and their strategic priorities. One is advancing research in health, of course, but the others are clinical and public health practice. If your research has implications for practice in public health or health clinically, you really should highlight that, because that's going to be really valued by the reviewers and more likely to be funded. Similarly, if it impacts public health policy, and we're talking about determinants of health, public health policy, if you can have research that does have these impacts, that's a really big plus, because addressing health determinants at the policy level is so critical for health research. So, and finally, in terms of a tip, CHR specifically, and maybe this goes across everything as well, describe how your award fits with your career plans, because one of the of course, priorities for CIHR is advancing health research and people who are conducting research. So future researchers, HQPs, and try and make your career plans aligning with their priority areas in the future too. So think about that. Not only your research, but as what you're going to do in the future to help the healthcare system and the public health system in Canada. So that's all for me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So we're just going to wrap up quickly here and get to the Q&A part, because I saw there's a bunch of questions that have come in on the Q&A, and I'm going to ask our panelists to turn cameras on shortly, and I'll stop sharing and we'll get into the Q&A. But remember, the big caution here is CIHR, NSERC, SSHRC, read thoroughly through the eligibility, the application, and the agency, right? So there are differences between them. We try and put on this workshop to cover the sort of broad, sort of key aspects that run across the three councils, but it's incumbent upon you to take that time to sort of review them in detail. Lots of resources that are available. Ashley put some of them into the chat already, and we certainly encourage you to take advantage of those resources. We want to help you succeed and put your best proposal forward. That's what we're all about. And certainly the key team at GSPA, the staff that are experts in each one of the different council areas. So here they are, Miranda, Laura, Elena, and Heidi. They're working in the backgrounds and in the foreground with our students and with faculty as they're moving forward during this application season. So chances are you'll be connecting with them. A couple of key deadlines to keep in mind. The 11th, right, is in terms of requesting official transcripts. So that's coming up. And then the October 7th deadline as well, right? So these are key to keep in mind. And then something that we want to highlight for our doctoral applicants on the call today and who might be viewing this is that we have a hands-on workshop September 25th from 4 till 6. And we encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity as well and get sort of some live real-time feedback on your proposal at that stage. So we're going to have faculty members, myself and others from around campus, and working with students and with staff to, again, have a conversation around it, sort of run your ideas by us. So please take advantage of that opportunity as well. All right. So without further ado, I will stop sharing, and I'll ask my colleagues to turn cameras on for a second, and we'll start getting into some of the questions that you have put in already. And maybe Ashley, you can help us walk through some of the stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all of you. So just as a reminder, so we're going to be jumping into some panelist questions that were kind of sent in beforehand through registration from you all, and as well, we'll try to answer as many as possible from the Q&A. If you haven't submitted your question yet, you can do so at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A. You can type your question in there. So one question that we commonly get that I'll put it out to the group is, what are some tips for writing a proposal on abstract topics where the impact to society may be hard to demonstrate? So things like theoretical physics.
Maybe I can start first on this topic, which happens quite a bit in NSERC proposals. So I think it's people have to take one step back and see how their theoretical research relates to, say, physics, okay, how that connection, okay, comes in, okay. Now, the NSERC committees, they usually have technical background. They can understand technical things, but you just have to explain, tell a story to tie them to it. Now, what could be more challenging would be the even more theoretical work in mathematics, where they're just about symbols and so on, okay. Again, tell a story of why this research is important in your field. So what is the gap in your field? Okay, so okay, why I want to prove this theorem, because there's missing something that's important to the field. Okay, so tell the stories so that people understand why this is important.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to answer that one as well?
Yeah,
I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry about that. You know, I was just at a PhD defense in pure math, and you know, I was the chair. I didn't really understand much of it, but you know, at the end there was a question about how does this relate to real life, and the student did a great job of actually bringing this together, because you know, even advancing the discipline of pure math is something. So you could emphasize, you know, the science too, and I know from CIHR, you know, advancing health research just by itself is one of their priorities. So, but then try and get that next level too, if you can. Well, if we advance this, then it helps also in this area of whatever too. So yeah, thanks.
Awesome. I think I'll ask Nadine to answer this one too, because I know she comes from a really good angle on this.
So in the slides at the end, there's sort of a bonus slide with an activity that you can use if this is something that you are struggling with. There's an exercise from Booth's book, The Craft of Research, that asks you to sort of fill in 3 blanks in order to identify, I'm working on the topic of, because I want my readers to understand, in order to, and it's the in order to piece that is the application. So it's perfectly fine to be making a contribution to abstract theory or to pure math or pure science. But if you can identify one potential application, you don't have to revolutionize the entire field of healthcare. I have a friend who works on calculus models, and one potential application is being able to personalize cancer treatment based on, you know, these models. And so she doesn't work in healthcare, she doesn't work in cancer treatment, but she has identified one particular potential application, just so that readers have something to grasp onto that feels concrete, even though there may be 5 other potential applications that she could have talked about instead.
Thank you. So the next question, I know Clarence, you talked a little bit about this as well in terms of the discipline differences, but what advice would you all have for those who maybe don't have any publications yet, who are looking to apply to these scholarships?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the absence of having publications, you all have some kind of relevant research experience, because you had to demonstrate that sort of research acumen as part of your graduate application. So whether it's through work experience or through undergraduate experience in projects, et cetera, you have research experiences that you can draw from. And when you look at the criteria, when what you're evaluated on in terms of the proposal and your abilities to conduct that proposal and your standing as an academic, it's more than just simply the listing of publications, right? So don't get too hung up on the fact that, you know, I don't have any, like, you know, should I even bother applying? Yes, you should. Because again, you know, if you have the standing, the grades, the experiences, and the direction that you're going in, you know, warrants serious consideration for a scholarship, then I would not sort of suggest that you don't bother applying because you don't have a publication. It is not the only criteria. It is an important criteria, but it's certainly not the only. And again, you have the opportunity to present the convincing argument that supports your application. So don't point out the negative or identify, oh, well, I don't have this. Tell us what you do have, right? So make that story strong.
Thank you for that. I think we'll move on to the next one. So kind of related a little bit to that last question. What would any of you have any advice to offer for grad students who have industry experience over other more tangible research success? So for instance, a first-year PhD student who is coming off of a 4-year stint in the industry.
I can jump in. One of the things that the application package is designed to do is to demonstrate that you are the person to complete this research and to do this work. And so I think you can absolutely refer to the work that you've done in industry as having prepared you to be ready to complete that work. So it helps to shore up the I am the right person for this project piece. So when I was going into my PhD, I didn't have publications. I talked about I've taken a course on this particular author, who is one of the authors I want to study. I've already done that background work. And the same thing applies to industry. You can often make correlations between the work that you were doing in industry and your familiarity with the field and your readiness to complete the research project.
Yeah, and one other thing, you know, over in the Faculty of Health, if somebody's got experience in the health sector or public health, that's really valuable because you're really at a real advantage for knowledge exchange too. Like you can really, if your research fits something where you can actually make an impact on public health practice, that's really valued, and then your experience is really valued. So you can really leverage it. So.
Yeah, that, you know, modern academia, again, where I think we've, even though the conversation still is there, but we've moved beyond sort of the ivory tower, sort of isolated from the rest of the world, right? I mean, many of you on this call have that valuable real world experience, and you're going to carry that with you moving into your graduate work, but it's also going to be part of your graduate work. So you may not have lists of publications, etc., but you have management experience, you have communication experience, you have mentorship experience. These are all key things that are supporting you and sort of raise your qualities as a researcher who, again, this is what I propose, and yes, I can do it, and here's why I can do it, right? So yeah, that's that work experience, I think, again, is invaluable.
Great, thank you. So for this next question, I'm wondering if one or two of you can speak on if the status of a referee makes a difference. For example, a reference coming from a dean versus a new professor.
That question makes me smile. Somebody else wants to jump in, though. I've already taken some of the airspace.
I can jump in and say a few words. Okay, I think important thing is the person is able to write you, someone who knows you, and it's the most important thing. The rank of the person not always that important, really. People may not even notice this is so and so. Okay, so I think more about, okay, so who is the person that knows you better? I think that's the one that you want to go with.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And I can tell a quick little story. So I read a lot of referee letters from one individual who shall remain nameless, but they were at a very high standing. But every one of the letters that I read from them said that the student was in the top 5% of students they had worked with. Right. So if you read 10 letters from somebody and they all say that the students, so after a while, it's kind of like, you know, just because they had high standing, it didn't mean that we put any extra credence in terms of the quality. So very much, you know, what Justin said is so key. How well do they know you? How well can they present your case? That's what matters the most, right? I mean, we don't necessarily think of it in terms of this pecking order. And there was a question in the chat that is somewhat related, so I'll bring it in, and that's somebody's indicating that they actually just met their supervisor recently, you know, and maybe they haven't really had a chance to develop that strong working relationship. But again, keep in mind, the supervisor has reviewed your file. They have made the decision to work with you. And we can tell a lot from an individual by their, their transcripts, their CV, the work that they've done. Have a couple of quick conversations, and about the work that you're going to be doing. And I think, they would certainly make a good choice as being a referee in that context. So yes, the relationships are important, but in the absence of those relationships, we can certainly present a well-structured reference file for somebody from what we can sort of read into and infer from what you presented to us.
Thank you. All right, for the next question, if there's any specific advice on scenarios where there is little to no previous literature in a research area that someone wants to go into.
Can I take this
There's
one on?
30,
Go
I
ahead,
was gonna
sorry.
say, there's 30,000 journals plus in the world. So if somebody tells me that there's no literature, I'm like, well, anyway, Nadine, over to you.
That's great. My first reaction is, I don't believe you. And so I think you have two jobs if you find yourself in this scenario. The first is to make an appointment with the liaison librarian for your department and ensure that you are using a comprehensive search strategy to find the literature that is related to your field and to your project. The second is to think interdisciplinarily. So maybe there is no work in your particular field that is related to the kind of work that you want to do, but there might be an adjacent field where that work is being done. And that's exactly the kind of thing that move 2, move 3 of creating a research space is designed to help you articulate. You've just identified a gap. So you can say, while there is, the beginning of a conversation about using infrared lighting to solve global warming over in engineering. I am so not an engineer. I made all of that up. None of that work is being taken into account in, the geography, faculty of environment context. And so I am going to be the person who bridges that conversation in this project and applies this new literature to this other context. And that is an example of the kinds of something is missing gap that we want you to be able to identify so that you can demonstrate that your project actually moves the world forward.
Thank you. So for this next question, are there any don't do's or red flags in terms of proposal language that students should be aware of to avoid in their applications?
I would avoid things like groundbreaking, first of its kind, because you're sort of inviting immediate speculation, right? So it's kind of like, the hyperbole that you might be tempted to include to sort of say, yes, this is vital work, it's groundbreaking, et cetera. So obviously those are things that I would definitely steer clear from in the language. Leave that to the referees. If they are the experts in the field and they truly see what the work that you're doing has the potential to, be a real step forward, a real innovation in the discipline, let them articulate that. Don't, include that in your proposal. The first thing we typically read is the proposal. So that's my sort of a don't use that kind of language.
Yeah, I would agree with that too, in terms of, promising too much, or your research is so great that it's, we like research that is really going to advance things, but I've read proposals where you almost are like, well, aren't you considering, you're putting yourself too far out there, it's going to do too much. And then people look at your work and say, are you kind of biased or something? Like, are you considering other things? So you do have to be careful with the hyperbole that, too much can go too far.
Thank you. All right, looking at our list of questions, one thing that students have wondered about is after they've submitted their application for funding, let's say maybe even they received the funding, is their project allowed to change at all from what they proposed in the initial application?
Well, I think, and again, checking the criteria and eligibility requirements for the award holder's guide, typically they'll have language in there about, you know, if there is going to be a deviation from what you had proposed, there's usually a means to sort of notify them as to how it's changed. But again, I would have to confirm that and look specifically at the particulars, but it has to be a fairly significant deviation, right? So, you know, if you had proposed to use Model X, and in the end, because of the iterative nature of research, as we're progressing, you suddenly shift and start using Model Y. It's not like you need to send NSERC a note to say that you switch from Model X to Model Y, right? So it'd be more sort of, I think if there is a significant change in tact, but this is something that we could certainly confirm and add into our information later. So.
All right, thank you. So in terms of the research proposal, can you comment on how to include equity, diversity, and inclusion in your writing in the proposal? I know Nadine might have some comments on this as well.
Yeah, I think one of the first things to think about is the kind of language you are using in the proposal. So there are all kinds of guides out there, and you can talk to us at the Writing and Communication Center about this too, in terms of referring to Indigenous research and what you are and aren't allowed to share, whether you are an owner of that information, the individual language you use to describe demographics, etc. I think this comes up a lot in CIHR when we're talking about the public health and the people that are being studied. I also think this takes shape before the proposal drafting itself. So we want to be thinking about, okay, who am I citing in my references? You know, am I drawing from, you know, one particular group of researchers, or do I have a diversity of perspectives in the research itself? Who is my work going to affect? And often, you know, that seems obvious in a health faculty, for example, because you're working with humans. But even in geology, you know, whose land are you on, and what is the potential effect of the work that you're doing on that land or its uses, are things that you can speak to, or at least reflect on, to ensure that they are taken into account in the way that you craft your proposal.
Another point is really know your terminology too. Because you don't want to use it wrong. You know, when you're talking about race, you know, you've got to be talking about race. If it's ethnicity, you got to know what ethnicity is. So make sure those words are used appropriately in your proposal.
Thank you both. So going on to the next question. So some of these competitions that students may be applying to may require a lay abstract. So I'm wondering if you could comment on what the difference is between a lay abstract and the research proposal that they'll be submitting for certain competitions.
Just really quickly, the lay abstract is kind of like if you're going to explain it to your grandmother, you would write it in a language that would be totally accessible, concise, and in a paragraph. Again, it doesn't mean that you take your 2-page proposal and try and squeeze it down into 200 words with the same tone and use of language, etc. It's meant to be accessible for the general public, right? Somebody on the street, you could hand this to and say, hey, here's a lay abstract of my research. What do you think? And it would be comprehensible to them, and would be written in a way that is, again, in the language that is sort of common language and explained with a lack of jargon and technical detail. So it is, as the name implies, for a lay person.
Thank you. All right, so it looks like we have 2 more minutes. Maybe we can get through one more question. Let's see. What are some examples of non-academic activities or experiences that might make a candidate stand out for these competitions?
I would say just really quickly, I'm always impressed by how people make the connections from their work experience. And, you know, it may even be something like, you know, a summer job where you had an opportunity to work in some kind of a research capacity, or maybe in a teaching and mentorship capacity. Again, these are things that sort of stand out as being unique, right? That this individual you know, again, led a camp activity related to computer science and, you know, worked with 30 students and developed, you know, the procedures and the experiments that the students were using, et cetera, et cetera. So these are sort of stories, little vignettes, if you will, that say something about you as an individual and your mind as sort of like a researcher, right? I mean, everyone, you know, involved in the panel today is a researcher. We have this inquisitive nature, but we've also worked on that and we've sort of built that skill over time. So those are some things that always kind of catch my attention, how people have these kinds of experiences and how they relate to their aspirations from a research standpoint.
Thank you so much. Oh, I know, does someone else want to quickly mention on that before we wrap it up?
Well, just want to quickly say that, okay, so outreach, okay, for example, is also another direction to demonstrate that your passion on the subject. I think it's always about you and why that matters to you. I think that's will be useful.
Awesome, thank you. Well, that brings us to 11:30. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for all of the informative presentation and answers. Thank you to everyone attending. Again, I know there were so many questions popping into the Q&A that we were unable to get to, but there are multiple people and resources on campus for you to get those answers. You can reach out to those scholarships and awards experts that were mentioned by Clarence. You can also have a conversation with your program graduate coordinator, which is a link, again, I will put into the chat right there. Conversations with your supervisor. Again, it's very important to read the application instructions and eligibility for your specific competition that you are interested in applying to. Again, this webinar has been recorded, so over the next few days, once we touch up some of the captioning, we will be putting it on our GSPA YouTube channel, and it will be made available on our website as well. And we will email everyone out that registered to notify about that as well. So just as a final reminder for those that are interested, if you are applying to one of the doctoral competitions, we are having that tri-agency workshop on September 25th. Highly recommend that you attend that. It will be a great experience to interact with faculty members and other staff about fine-tuning and creating especially your research proposal and different various pieces of your application. So I hope you all have a great day and thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.